weaver's daughter. The day Rosemary Thornton learned her father was dying, she was standing in a textile mill in Lancashire, surrounded by the deafening roar of mechanical looms. She was 23 years old, with calloused hands and clear gray eyes that had learned early not to show what she felt. When the foreman handed her the telegram, she read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in her apron pocket before returning to her work. Her father had 3 months, perhaps 4. Cancer, the telegram said, though everyone in their village would know what that meant. A slow fading, a drawing inward, until there was nothing left but memory and grief. Rosemary finished her shift, collected her wages, and walked the 7 miles home to Ashworth, a village so small it barely warranted a name on any map. The houses were built of gray stone that matched the sky, and the moors stretched endlessly in every direction, purple with heather in summer, brown and stark the rest of the year. Her father, Thomas Thornton, had been the village weaver for 40 years, working a hand loom in the cottage that had belonged to his father and his father's father before him. But the mechanized mills were killing the trade, and Thomas was among the last of his kind, a craftsman in an age that no longer valued craft. When Rosemary arrived home, she found him sitting at his loom, his hands still moving through the familiar motions, even though his breath came short and his face was gray with pain. "You shouldn't have come," he said, not looking up. "The mill pays better than I ever could." "The mill can find another girl," Rosemary said, hanging her shawl by the door. "You only have 1 daughter." Thomas's hands paused, and for a moment she thought she saw his shoulders shake. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "I won't have you sacrificing your future for an old man's pride." "It's not pride to want to die at home," Rosemary said gently, "and it's not sacrifice to choose to be here." The village doctor came that evening and confirmed what the telegram had said. 3 months, perhaps 4. Keep him comfortable. There was nothing more to be done. After the doctor left, Rosemary sat with her father by the fire. The loom stood silent in the corner, half-finished cloth still stretched across its frame, a pattern of heather and stone, the colors of the moors they both loved. "I want to teach you," Thomas said suddenly, "the weaving before it's too late." Rosemary looked at him in surprise. "Father, I work in a mill. I know how to weave." "You know how to tend machines," Thomas corrected. "That's not the same thing. I want to teach you the old way, the patterns our family has used for generations, the stories woven into the cloth." He coughed, and Rosemary fetched him water. When he could speak again, his voice was urgent. "Promise me you'll learn. Promise me the knowledge won't die with me." "I promise," Rosemary said, though she wondered what use such knowledge would be in a world of mechanical looms and factory cloth. The lessons began the next morning. Thomas was patient but exacting, showing Rosemary how to set up the loom, how to select the threads, how to create tension, how to move the shuttle with just the right rhythm. The mechanical looms of the mill had made her fast, but Thomas taught her to be precise. "Every thread matters," he said, watching her work. "Every decision you make affects the whole. If one thread is too loose, if one color is wrong, the entire pattern suffers. This is not like factory work, where you can throw away mistakes. This is craft. This is art. This is memory. As Rosemary learned the mechanics, Thomas taught her the patterns. Each one had a name, a history, a meaning. The Moor's heart pattern, with its interlocking diamonds, represented the village and its families, connected across generations. The shepherd's path showed the ancient tracks across the moors, the ways their ancestors had walked. The heather crown was woven only for wedding cloths, a blessing for new marriages. These patterns are our stories, Thomas explained one afternoon. His breathing labored, but his eyes bright. When words are forgotten, when names fade, the cloth remembers. Someone's great-grandmother wove this pattern. Someone's great-granddaughter will wrap herself in it. That's immortality, Rosemary. Not in monuments or wealth, but in the work of our hands passed forward. Rosemary bent over the loom, her hands learning the rhythm her father's hands had known for 40 years. And as she worked, she felt something shift inside her, a connection to the past she'd never known she was missing, a sense of belonging that the mill had never given her. Winter came hard that year. Snow fell early and stayed late, covering the moors in white, turning the village into an island of gray stone in a sea of ice. Thomas grew weaker, spending more time in bed, less time at the loom. But on his good days, he would sit beside Rosemary and guide her hands, correct her mistakes, tell her the stories behind each pattern. The village women came to visit, bringing soup and bread, sitting by the fire and talking in low voices about weather and sheep prices and who had married whom. They treated Thomas with a gentle deference, the way one treats someone who is already halfway to the next world. One of the visitors was Mary Fletcher, a widow who lived alone in a cottage on the edge of the village. She was perhaps 40, still handsome despite the lines worry and work had carved around her eyes. She brought Thomas a special tea, herbs gathered from the moors, said to ease pain and bring sleep. "How is he?" Mary asked Rosemary quietly, while Thomas dozed in his chair. "Failing," Rosemary said. "Each day a little less of him is here." Mary nodded. "Your father is a good man, one of the best I've known. The village will be poorer without him." Rosemary looked at the older woman with sudden insight. "You care for him?" A flush rose in Mary's weathered cheeks. "I did once, long ago, before he married your mother. But he chose her, and rightly so. She was everything I wasn't. Educated, refined, beautiful. I bore him no ill will. I was glad he found happiness." "My mother died when I was 5, Rosemary said. "I barely remember her." "She loved you both very much," Mary said, "and your father never looked at another woman after she passed. Some men remarry quickly. Thomas never even considered it. He said he'd had his great love, and that was enough for one lifetime." After Mary left, Rosemary sat by her father's sleeping form and wondered about love, about loneliness, about the choices people made and the prices they paid. Her father had loved once, deeply, and then spent 18 years alone rather than settle for something less. Was that noble or simply sad? Spring came slowly, as it always did in the north. The snow retreated, revealing brown earth and the first brave shoots of green. Thomas rallied slightly with the warming weather, spending more hours at the loom, teaching Rosemary the the most complex patterns, the ones that required the greatest skill. "This one," he said one morning, indicating a pattern of extraordinary intricacy, all interwoven lines and subtle color shifts, "is called the lover's knot. It's the most difficult pattern we weave. It takes weeks to complete, and a single mistake can ruin the entire piece." "What's it for?" Rosemary asked. "It's a wedding gift, the finest gift a family can give. It represents two lives woven together, separate threads becoming one cloth, stronger together than apart." Thomas coughed, a deep, rattling sound. "I wove one for your mother and me. It took me 3 months. I made 17 mistakes and had to start over each time. But when it was finished," his eyes grew distant. "When it was finished, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever made. We kept it on our bed until the day she died. After that, I couldn't bear to look at it. I gave it to Mary Fletcher to keep safe." Rosemary worked the shuttle through the threads, thinking about her father's love, about the cloth that represented it, about the woman who had kept it safe all these years. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Never remarrying, never trying to find happiness again?" Thomas was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. Then, "I had my happiness. Your mother gave me you, gave me love, gave me memories that have sustained me through 18 years of loneliness. How could I regret that? How could I call that anything but an extraordinary gift? But you've been alone. I've been solitary. That's different from alone. I've had you. I've had my work. I've had the knowledge that I once loved and was loved in return. That's more than many people ever have." Rosemary's hands stilled on the loom. "I want that," she said, surprising herself. "I want to love like that, to be willing to weave 17 times until I get it right." Thomas smiled, and for a moment, he looked young again, the way he must have looked when he courted her mother. "Then you will. That kind of love. It finds you when you're ready for it. You can't chase it. You can only be open to it when it arrives." It was on a market day in late spring when Rosemary met James Ashford. She had walked into the village center to sell 2 pieces her father had woven. Simple work, but beautiful, the kind of quality no mill could match. She was standing in the square, the cloth draped over her arm, when a young man approached. He was perhaps 25, tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes the color of the moors after rain. He wore the clothes of a laborer, but carried himself with a quiet dignity that suggested something more. "That's fine work," he said, gesturing to the cloth. "Hand-woven. My father's work," Rosemary said. "Thomas Thornton." Recognition lit the man's eyes. "I know the name. He's a master weaver, one of the last." He touched the cloth gently, reverently. "I'm a weaver too, or I'm learning to be. I work in the mill in Lancashire, but I want to learn the old methods, the craft, not just the production." "Why?" Rosemary asked, genuinely curious. "The mills pay better. The work is easier." "Easier, yes, but there's no soul in it. You tend machines all day, and at the end, you've made cloth, but you haven't made anything that's yours. There's no craft, no artistry, no connection to the past." He met her eyes, and she felt something shift in her chest. "I want to make things that matter, things that will last, things that carry stories. My father is teaching me," Rosemary say. The old patterns, the traditional methods. Perhaps you could come to the cottage, learn from him. He'd like having a student who truly wants to learn. James's face lit with such genuine joy that Rosemary found herself smiling in response. I would be honored, truly. When? Tomorrow, after your shift. Tomorrow, James agreed, and when he smiled at her, Rosemary felt something she'd never felt before, a recognition, a sense that she had known this man always, was only now meeting him for the first time. James came to the cottage the next evening, carrying a gift, bread and cheese he'd bought in the market. Thomas received him with the careful courtesy of a man evaluating a potential student, asking about his experience, his knowledge, his commitment to learning. I work in the mill to earn my living, James explained, but I want to learn the craft. I grew up in a village like this one, watching my grandmother weave. She died before she could teach me properly. I've been searching for someone who still knows the old ways. Thomas studied him with sharp eyes. The old ways are dying. The mills are the future. Why swim against the tide? Because some things are worth preserving, James said. Because craft matters. Because there's a difference between making cloth and making something beautiful. Because... He paused, searching for words. Because if we lose all connection to how things were made, if everything becomes machines and speed and efficiency, we lose something essential about being human. We lose the stories. We lose the soul. Thomas nodded slowly, and Rosemary saw approval in his eyes. Come tomorrow, he said. We'll see if you have the patience for it. Weaving isn't just about knowing the patterns. It's about having the patience to do them right, the humility to start over when you make mistakes, and the commitment to honor the work. I have patience, James said, and I'm not afraid of starting over. Sometimes starting over is how we find what we're meant to make. He glanced at Rosemary as he said it, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. James came every evening after his shift at the mill. He learned quickly, his hands remembering rhythms his grandmother must have taught him years ago. Thomas was a demanding teacher, but James never complained, never cut corners, never settled for good enough when excellent was possible. And as he learned, he and Rosemary worked side by side at the two looms, Thomas's and an older one they'd brought down from the attic. They worked in companionable silence, occasionally asking questions, sometimes laughing at mistakes, always aware of each other in a way that made the air between them feel charged. Thomas watched them with knowing eyes, but said nothing. He grew weaker as spring turned to summer, spending more time directing from his chair than working at the loom himself. But he seemed content, watching his knowledge pass to two young people who valued it, who would carry it forward. One evening, when Thomas had gone to bed early, James and Rosemary worked late, finishing a piece together. The cottage was quiet, except for the rhythmic sound of the shuttles, the fire crackling, the distant cry of a night bird on the moors. "Why did you leave the mill?" James asked suddenly. "You were earning good wages. You had a future there." Rosemary's hands continued their work, her eyes on the threads. "Because my father needed me. Because some things matter more than wages. Because..." She paused. because I realized I'd been living someone else's life. The mill, the city, the noise and crowds. That wasn't me. I belonged here, with the moors and the silence and the work my family has done for generations. Do you regret it? No. Do you regret working in the mill when you'd rather be doing this? James smiled. Every day. But I need the wages. I'm saving. Someday, I want to have my own workshop, to weave full-time, to teach others. It's a dream, probably an impossible one, but it's what keeps me going. It's not impossible, Rosemary said. My father did it, his father before him. If you have the skill and the commitment, you can make a life from this work. And what about you? James asked, his voice soft. What do you want? Rosemary's hands stilled on the loom. What did she want? She wanted her father to live, but that was impossible. She wanted to preserve his knowledge, to carry forward the patterns and stories. She wanted to continue the weaving, to make beautiful things that mattered. And she looked at James, really looked at him, and saw him looking back with an expression that made her heart race. I want to keep weaving, she said carefully. I want to honor my father's legacy. I want to make things that will outlast me, that will carry stories forward. And she took a breath. I want to not be alone. James set down his shuttle and crossed to her loom. He took her hands, calloused and stained with dye, the hands of a worker, and held them gently. You won't be, he said. I promise you that. You won't be alone. And when he kissed her, soft and tentative, Rosemary felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness, of two separate threads beginning to weave together. Thomas died in late summer, on a day when the heather was blooming purple across the moors. He went peacefully, in his sleep, with Rosemary sitting beside him and his hand in hers. His last words, whispered the evening before, were, "Finish the pattern. Always finish the pattern." The village turned out for his funeral. They buried him in the churchyard, next to Rosemary's mother, and people spoke of his skill, his integrity, his quiet kindness. Mary Fletcher wept openly, grieving not just for the man who had died, but for the love she'd carried for him, unspoken, for 40 years. After the funeral, after the visitors had left and the cottage was quiet, Rosemary and James sat together by the cold loom. Thomas's last piece was still stretched across the frame, 3/4 finished, a pattern called the Moor's Blessing, traditionally woven to mark the passing of a master craftsman. I should finish it, Rosemary said. It was his last wish, but I don't know if I can. This pattern, it's beyond my skill. Not alone, James said, but together we could do it. He taught us both. Between us, we have his knowledge. We can finish what he started. They worked on it for weeks, side by side, unpicking sections that weren't quite right, redoing them, perfecting each thread. It was painstaking work, requiring all their concentration, all their skill. But gradually, the pattern emerged, complex, beautiful, a testament to Thomas's mastery and their dedication to honoring it. When it was finished, they hung it in the cottage, above the fireplace, where it caught the light and seemed to glow with a life of its own. Rosemary whispered. "It's his legacy," James said, "and ours now. The knowledge he gave us, the patterns he taught us, the stories woven into every thread." They married that autumn in the same church where Thomas was buried. It was a small ceremony, just the village, the people who had known them both, who had watched them grow and learn and fall in love. Mary Fletcher gave them Thomas's lover's knot, the cloth he had woven for Rosemary's mother, and Rosemary cried as she wrapped it around her shoulders. "Your father would be glad," Mary said. "He wanted you to be happy. He wanted you to find what he had with your mother." "Did you ever regret it?" Rosemary asked impulsively. "Loving him and never telling him?" Mary smiled, sad but peaceful. "Every day, and not at all. Love doesn't always need to be spoken, child. Sometimes it's enough to carry it quietly, to know you felt something true and deep, even if nothing came of it. I had my chance long ago. He chose your mother, and I chose to be glad for his happiness. That's love too, in its way." After the wedding, James moved into the cottage. They worked the two looms side by side, taking on commissions, selling their work in the markets, slowly building a reputation. The mill paid better, but they didn't need much. They had each other. They had their craft. They had the moors and the sky and the wind that never stopped blowing. Winter came again, as it always did. But this winter was different. This winter, Rosemary was not alone in the cottage, keeping vigil over a dying man. This winter, she had James beside her, his warmth in bed, his hands working the loom across from hers, his laughter filling the rooms that had been silent for so long. One evening, as snow fell outside and the fire crackled within, James called Rosemary to his loom. "Look," he said, showing her his work. It was a new pattern, one she'd never seen before. It incorporated elements of the traditional designs, the diamonds of the Moor's heart, the paths of the shepherd's way, the interlacing of the lover's knot, but arranged in a new way, a pattern that was both familiar and entirely original. "What will you call it?" Rosemary asked. "I don't know yet. It's not finished. I was hoping you would help me complete it, that we would make it together, a pattern that belongs to both of us." Rosemary sat at her loom and began to weave, her threads joining with James's, their rhythms synchronizing, their hands creating something new from the old knowledge, something that was theirs alone. As they worked, Rosemary thought about her father, about the knowledge he'd passed to her, about the stories woven into cloth. She thought about her mother, whom she barely remembered, but whose love had sustained Thomas through 18 years of solitude. She thought about Mary Fletcher, carrying unspoken love for 4 decades. She thought about all the weavers who had come before, all the hands that had worked these patterns, all the stories embedded in every thread. And she thought about the future, about the children she and James might have, about teaching them as Thomas had taught her, about patterns and stories passing forward, generation after generation, an unbroken thread connecting past to present to future. "I know what we should call it," she said suddenly. "What?" "The Weaver's Promise, because it represents what we promise to each other, to the craft, to everyone who taught us, that we'll honor the work, that we'll pass the knowledge forward, hands moving in perfect rhythm, weaving their story into cloth, thread by thread, moment by moment, creating something that would outlast them both. Years passed. James quit the mill and devoted himself full-time to weaving. They took on apprentices, young people from the village and beyond who wanted to learn the old ways. Their reputation grew. People came from distant towns seeking their work, willing to pay premium prices for cloth made by hand, made with care, made with the old knowledge. They had children, 3 daughters who grew up at the looms, learning patterns before they learned letters, understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves, that their hands carried forward the work of generations. The cottage that had been so silent, so full of grief, became full of life. Children's laughter, students' questions, the constant rhythm of shuttles, and the soft thud of treadles. The walls held dozens of finished pieces, each one telling a story, each one a promise kept. Rosemary taught her daughters what Thomas had taught her, that every thread matters, that patience is a virtue, that the cloth remembers even when people forget. She showed them how to weave the traditional patterns and encouraged them to create new ones, to add their own stories to the ongoing narrative of their family's craft. And sometimes, in quiet moments, when the cottage was finally still and the children were asleep and James sat reading by the fire, Rosemary would take down her father's last piece, the Moor's Blessing, and run her hands over its surface, feeling the threads, remembering the man who had taught her, honoring the promise she had made to him, to finish the pattern, always to finish the pattern. On a summer evening many years later, when Rosemary was old and her daughters were grown with children of their own, she sat at her loom working on a new piece. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis now, her eyes not as sharp as they'd been, but the movements were automatic, ingrained by decades of practice. James sat in his chair by the fire, no longer able to weave himself, content to watch and offer advice and tell stories to the grandchildren who climbed onto his lap. Their oldest daughter, Catherine, worked at Thomas's original loom, her movements sure and practiced. She was teaching her own daughter now, passing forward the knowledge, keeping the promise. "Grandmother," the little girl asked, "why do we weave the old patterns? Why not just use the new looms in the cities? They're faster." Rosemary set down her shuttle and smiled at her great-granddaughter. "Come here, child. Let me tell you a story." The little girl climbed onto her lap, careful not to disturb the cloth on the loom. "Once," Rosemary began, "there was a man who knew he was dying. He could have spent his last months resting, but instead, he chose to teach. He chose to pass his knowledge to his daughter, to make sure that the work of his hands, and his father's hands, and his father's father's hands would not be lost. He chose to weave stories into cloth, so that even when words were forgotten, the patterns would remember." "That was your father," the little girl said. "Great-great-grandfather Thomas." "Yes, and he taught me that some things are worth preserving, even when the world says they're obsolete. He taught me that craft matters, that beauty matters, that the work of our hands is how we connect to the past and reach toward the future. He taught me that every thread matters, and that the pattern isn't finished until the last thread is woven. She hugged her great-granddaughter close. And now I teach you, as he taught me, as you will someday teach your own children. This is how stories survive. This is how knowledge endures. Not in books or museums, but in the living work of hands, passed from generation to generation, each one adding their own threads to the pattern. The little girl was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Will you teach me the hard patterns, grandmother? The ones that take a long time?" Rosemary smiled, and in that smile was Thomas's smile, and her mother's smile, and the smiles of all the weavers who had come before. "Yes," she said, "I'll teach you everything I know, and you'll teach your children, and they'll teach theirs, and the pattern will continue as long as there are hands willing to do the work, as long as there are hearts willing to honor the promise." What promise? The weaver's promise, to honor the craft, to respect the stories, to weave with care and patience, to pass the knowledge forward, to finish the pattern no matter how long it takes. The little girl nodded solemnly, as if taking a vow. "I promise, grandmother." "Good," Rosemary said. "Then the work continues." That night, after the children had gone to bed and the cottage was finally quiet, Rosemary and James sat together by the dying fire. They held hands, their fingers interlaced, two separate threads woven together so long they'd become one cloth. "Do you think we did it?" Rosemary asked. "Do you think we kept his promise, your grandmother's promise?" James squeezed her hand. "Look around, love. Look at our daughters, our grandchildren. Look at the looms, still working. Look at the patterns, still being woven. Look at the knowledge, still being passed forward. Yes, we kept the promise. We finished the pattern, and our children will continue it after we're gone." "I miss him," Rosemary said softly. "After all these years, I still miss my father." "I know, but he's here, isn't he? In the patterns we weave, in the stories we tell, in the hands of every child we teach. That's what he meant about immortality. Not in monuments or wealth, but in the work that continues, in the knowledge that endures, in the stories woven into every thread." Rosemary rested her head on James's shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, listening to the night sounds of the moors, feeling the weight and lightness of a life well lived, of promises kept, of patterns completed, and new patterns just beginning. Outside, the moors stretched endlessly, purple with heather, ancient and enduring. And inside the cottage, the looms stood ready for tomorrow's work, holding the threads of stories not yet told, patterns not yet completed, promises not yet made, but already waiting to be kept. The work would continue, the patterns would endure, the stories would survive, thread by thread, generation by generation, one careful, patient, loving stitch at a time. For everyone who has inherited knowledge from those who came before, for everyone passing wisdom to those who come after, for everyone honoring the work of hands and the stories woven into every craft, for everyone keeping promises to the dead by living fully in the present. May we all find our looms. May we all learn our patterns. May we all remember